Awesome. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. My name is Paul Formasano. I'm the director of the Salazar Rio Grande del Norte Center here at Adams State University, and we appreciate you being here. We're grateful to the opportunity to insert this special presentation into what is the typical faculty lecture series slot, and I know that we will be fed tonight as we learn from Dr. Giner. Just a few thanks. We're grateful to have President First Lady Tamberg joining us this evening, and also to the Office of Community and Global Impact, who is co-sponsoring this. And then, as always, we always have wonderful support from our local water districts, the Caneos, San Luis Valley and Rio Grande water districts, and we appreciate their support tonight and for the reception that will follow. And so we hope that you will stick around and follow us over to Vistas for some food and conversation. We are here tonight to hear from Dr. Maria Elena Giner. She holds a Ph.D., an MBA, a very well accomplished individual. She's a nationally recognized leader in water policy and transboundary governance with more than 35 years of experience. Appointed by President Joe Biden in 2021, she became the first Latina to serve as U.S. Commissioner of the International Boundary and Water Commission. In this role, she negotiated 6 historic agreements with Mexico, including measures to address water scarcity in the Rio Colorado and Rio Grande basins, benefiting more than 40 million U.S. residents. She also secured $350 million for the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant and modernized federally owned critical infrastructure. Prior to that service, she was the general manager of the Border Environment Cooperation Commission. And Dr. Giner directed $9 billion in environmental infrastructure investments that improved water, wastewater, and air quality for over 10 million residents in 100 border communities. And as I mentioned, she has a whole list of degrees. She earned her undergraduate in civil engineering from Loyola Marymount, an MBA from the University of Texas, El Paso, and a PhD in public policy from the University of Texas at Austin. She's a registered professional engineer, first-generation college graduate, and daughter of an immigrant. Dr. Giner is a proud product of the El Paso Juarez border region, and she's an adventurer. She dealt with some crazy flight cancellations and car rentals, and we're very pleased that she was able to make it here for us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Giner.
Thank you, Paul. And what you need to add to that is that I grew up in the Ciudad Juarez. I grew up in Ciudad Juarez. I went to high school, to an all-girls Catholic school in El Paso, Texas. I've been to Catholic school my entire life, so I live with permanent Catholic guilt. And so one of the things I said, no, we're going to make this work. I will get here one way or another. But first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for really caring about what this university does for this community. It really is, in Spanish, we call it un patrimonio de la región, right? Like it's important for the region. It's an asset. It's a public amenity that's here for the young people here, and an access to education. I am first generation college educated, so my parents, grew up in a working class family. My parents did not have college education. And here I am with a PhD. When I finished my undergrad, I said, I'm never going back to school, but things happen in life. And that's what I tell young people all the time. And so this presentation that I'm giving has a little bit of fun in it because I want to make sure my audience is awake. There are some trivia questions. And if you answer the questions, you get some dark chocolate from Bali that I brought. I have it right here, right? Don't make me take it back with me, right? So what you see right here are all of our offices of the International Boundary and Water Commission. Who knows what the International Boundary and Water Commission is? Okay, a few of you. And so the International Boundary and Water Commission is located in El Paso, Texas. And it is the highest ranking federal office outside of Washington, D.C. So whoever is managing the IBWC reports directly to the president. Now, I don't have his cell number, trust me. And so that's probably why I was 4 months into the next administration, because the way the federal government works when you're an appointee, the president asks for the resignation of all of the cabinet members, and they don't get to people like me that are in these small independent agencies. So that's how I was somewhat of a holdover. But what you see in these pictures is you see a wastewater treatment plant in San Diego. You see in Nogales a wastewater treatment plant. In Yuma, that's actually a diversion dam. In the Upper Rio Grande, that's another diversion dam. Amistad Field Office is one of our largest reservoirs in the nation. And then in the Lower Rio Grande, we do a lot of flood control. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, okay? Well, like I said, I went to an all-girls Catholic school. Here you'll be able to do the math and figure out my age. But I have a degree in civil engineering. And so I went into civil engineering. And I say this because I know we have some students in the audience. I went into civil engineering because I hated to speak in public and write. And so that's all I do now. I write and I speak in public, right? And so I think that's really important, as I go through this discussion, to understand that I went into engineering because it fit into a formula and it fit into a box. But the greatest variable in anything you do, can anybody guess what the greatest variable is? People. Who said people? You get a chocolate. People. So I got my PhD in public policy because it's about explaining the past. Economists model the behavior of people trying to predict the future, right? So I worked when I graduated from Loyola. I did internships. I also worked for a large water district. I went in becoming a typical design engineer, designing water and wastewater facilities. Um, and then I went to go work for the Border Environment Cooperation Commission. Has anybody ever heard of that one? No, right? So I was working in the United States. The Border Environment Cooperation Commission is actually located in Ciudad Juarez. And that's where I got my chops in working in Mexico. So they were formed out of NAFTA. When NAFTA was signed, there was a side agreement that created the North American Development Bank and the Border Environment Cooperation Commission. And the North American Development Bank is in San Antonio, and the Border Environment Cooperation Commission is in Ciudad Juarez. And so we were tasked, we had a board of US and Mexican federal agencies, and we were tasked with helping communities along the border on both sides to bring water, sanitation, landfill, paving, renewable energy. So I'd worked a lot. I worked there for 20 years. So after I termed out, I moved up. I was first a Bush appointee, a government appointee under the Bush administration in this organization. And then during the Obama administration, I became a appointee. When I graduated, when I termed out in 2017, I went from earning 6 figures to living below the poverty level to do my PhD. And so what I wanted to do, I was very curious at that time. I wanted to understand if everything I did in helping communities bring water and wastewater made a difference in their lives. Because one of the things that I tell engineers is that it's not about the rebar that you lay or the concrete that you pour. It's about whether that infrastructure met its original objective, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that. So if you see right there, that's my family down there. We had 3 graduations during COVID. I graduated with my PhD. My oldest daughter graduated from college, and my youngest one, and my middle child graduated from high school. And there's my husband in the center. We totally planned this. All we needed him to do was hold our purses, but he refused to do that. So there's a little bit of humor there, right? So this is really interesting because when I got the call from the White House to see if I was interested in the IBWC position, I was still working on my dissertation, and it takes a little while to get you in. And so one of the things that, and these are the things that I share because these are very real for many of you, is that I was ready to graduate in May of 2021, but my appointment hadn't come through. And in May of 2021, when I would have left UT, I would have run out of healthcare. And so I pushed it into the summer and defended in the summer. And during that time, they kept asking me, the White House kept asking me, no, the president hasn't said yes, but send us your bio. And I kept thinking, should I call myself a doctor? Should I not call myself a doctor? Because this is how scandals are formed, right? You call yourself something, but then 2 weeks you become a doctor. And of course, they're not going to say that, right? So I'll talk about that story. I'm going to put a pin on it. I do want to talk a little bit about my work at the Border Environment Cooperation Commission. So you see the border down there, right? So this is why I wanted to do my PhD, because when I started at the Border Environment Cooperation Commission, only 26% of the border communities on the Mexican side had sanitation. Can anybody guess where that sewage was going? Shared water bodies, right? Yeah, that's a lot of contamination. And during that time, by the time I left and at night, and I started in 1998, and by the time I left, over 90% of that population now had wastewater. That's 340 million gallons per day of raw sewage that was flowing, yes. But, you know, we did it because we had the support. Funding came from EPA, funding came from CONAGUA. So this was a recognition that two countries needed to work together. And every project that I worked on definitely had this multiple funding sources from the US government, from the Mexican government. On the US side, there were 300,000 people in Texas with no sewer or sanitation. And the incidences of waterborne diseases were twice the state average. A lot of hepatitis A, okay? By the time I left, those 90% of those 300,000 people had sanitation, and $1 billion went into investment. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But so what I did was I went back to school and I wanted to look at whether we made a difference. We built all this infrastructure. Did we make a difference in all of those diseases, right? And so I did this, my dissertation focused on municipal infrastructure and public policy, because one of the things I learned, I went into engineering because I wanted to design. I went into engineering because I wanted to fit into everything to fit into a nice square box. But the best infrastructure was done because of good public policy. And what does public policy involve? People, that's right, people, right? And so I did 3 papers. One was on the assessing the impact of water and sanitation on Texas communities. And basically they had 4 diseases that they were impacted by. 4 diseases. One of them was hepatitis A, tuberculosis, shigellosis, and salmonellosis. Only one got better with sanitation. Can anybody guess? You get a chocolate. What's that? There you go. Anna, I'm gonna throw it. I'm gonna catch it for her. Anna, yes. Hepatitis A went from being twice the state average to being equal with the state average. Tuberculosis got worse. Shigellosis remained unimpacted, and salmonellosis remained unimpacted, right? Why? Well, that will be the next dissertation for somebody, right? Okay. So I talked about after I graduated and I defended, I was asked for my bio, and the day that it was announced that I would be appointed was the day I graduated. So I was, whew, I put doctor in my bio and I was good to go. Right. So I was a Biden appointee for this organization called the International Boundary and Water Commission. And people here in Colorado who work on water issues are very familiar with this. And I'll talk about why they are familiar with it. So first, There's a lot of words here, but what does the IBWC do? So we had offices, 12 offices going from San Diego all the way down to South Texas. And what we did was water delivery. We worked with the Bureau of Reclamation to deliver water to Mexico in the Sonora, Baja California area through Yuma. We also worked with Bureau of Reclamation to deliver water through El Paso from the Rio Grande in this area. And then we also worked with Mexico receiving water from them after Fort Quitman. So from Presidio on down to South Texas, 90% of their water source comes from the Rio Grande. We also had dams. We had two of the largest dams in the nation, hydroelectric power plants, 2 wastewater treatment plants, and we also were responsible for maintaining all of the boundary between the United States and Mexico. And that is really one of the things that I learned to appreciate through that process was the role that we played with CBP on informing them of where they could enforce the law. And let me tell you, we had incidences where we would have CBP on the Mexican side, right? Or we had infrastructure being built on the Mexican side. So that was a really important role for the International Boundary and Water Commission. So the International Boundary and Water Commission is one of the oldest federal agencies in the United States. So what happens when countries fight and then they have a treaty? What's the first thing? You set your boundary, right? So the Convention of 1889 established the International Boundary Commission, and that came as a result of the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty to define that boundary. And then after that, there were other things, other treaties that were important that came out. One was the Convention of 1906, and you can see on there that that's where water is delivered right here in this area. Then we've got the Convention of 1933, which stabilized the boundary because we had a boundary that was shifting. We have the 1944 Water Treaty that is responsible for this portion of the Rio Grande and also a portion of the Colorado River. And the 1970 Boundary Treaty, which established how the Rio Grande and Colorado River boundaries would be delineated. So when you have land boundaries, it's cool. You put your monuments there, it's clear. But rivers change. And this is the treaty that said the boundary is going to be the middle of the river. So that is part of some of the work that we do. There are things that go across the rivers all the time. There's pipelines that go underneath the river. There's electric pipelines and cabling and all of that. And we are responsible for ensuring that infrastructure that goes under the river is not doing two things. Deflecting the river, okay? Because the river, you want to maintain your boundary, right? Or obstructing the river, raising in case of a flood. You don't want something to obstruct it, right? So there's a lot of ports of entry that have elements inside of the river to promote trade. Okay. So the IBWC, so there's a US section and there's a Mexican section. And here are the treaty officers from the US section are on the right, and from the Mexican section are on the left. And everything we do in 2 languages. The advantage and everything we do is also with translation. The advantage that I have is I speak Spanish, so I know where all the dead bodies are, and I can see what people are saying, right? So how many transboundary watersheds does anybody think there are in the world? Surface water, let's not even talk groundwater. Around the world, close to 300. 286, I believe. Okay. And of that 286, less than a third have any sort of framework for cooperation. And the International Boundary and Water Commission is like considered the gold standard. which is really interesting because you would think, those countries are older than the United States, right? That they would have these institutions of infrastructure that are very, hey, you guys back there, this is not church. Come on, come to the front. We have a row right here if you guys want to come to the front. I guess don't be afraid. Anyways, what the IBWC does is they sign minutes. So when the 1944 Water Treaty was signed, could we figure everything out? No, right? Things changed. And so during there are 332 minutes signed that talk about changes in operation, infrastructure that we built. We had, at the IBWC, there are 2 international wastewater treatment plants. At the IBWC, there's 2 international dams. And the dams, both sides have to work together, right? Because they're on the Rio Grande. And you've got Mexican operators, right, working right next to US operators. And you have we have to delineate the boundaries. We have a line down the middle, right? But there's people go back and forth, okay? And so that is the collaboration that we did. So when we signed the 1944 Water Treaty, we didn't know about drought. We didn't have dams built. We even have treaties on the type of identification you need because we have Mexican and US nationals going back and forth with a certain type of identification. So there's a lot of things that go into these 1944, into these minutes, I'm sorry. And so I got to sign 6 minutes while I was there. And they're binding agreements between the United States and Mexico, and they're approved by the Department of State and Mexico's Foreign Ministry of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay, so again, it's not like we can go rogue and sign all of these minutes between ourselves. And they're called minutes because when you read them, they read like if they were a minute from a meeting. But there's a lot of negotiation that goes beyond it, lots of meetings, lots of trust building, lots of focus on every single word, because what one person says and what another person hears can be very different. Okay, so here's my first trivia question. Okay, what are the 10 border states between the United States and Mexico? Can anybody start naming one? Let's talk with the first one. Yes, ma'am. States, Coahuila. Okay, you got one. Okay. Chihuahua and Texas, yes. Come on, students, these adults, these old fogies are beating you guys out. Yes, right there, student. Yes, you come up here for your candy. I can't throw that far. New Mexico, okay. California, who said California? Yes, ma'am. Why don't you come up here? California. Yes, yes. Arizona. Okay, so we're missing some Mexican states. Who said Tamaulipas? Oh my God, you are like the geography guru. So I do this presentation to a lot of engineers, and their geography is terrible, right? But we said California, we said Arizona, we said New Mexico and Texas. Very good. Everybody remembered all the US states. Mexican states, we forgot Baja California, Sonora, we got Chihuahua, we got Coahuila, no one got Nuevo León, and no one got Tamaulipas, right? So these are all the states, the border states. And so there is a lot of trade between the border states. Almost every single Fortune 500 company in the United States has a facility in the border states. So because of NAFTA, because of all of the collaboration, these states have very close relationships. All right. So what are the border cities with the major ports of entry? Well, let's start with this one. Yes, yes. And the next one? The next dot? Who said Nogales? Very good. Yes, sir. Here, gentlemen, back there. Right? And the next one, El Paso already said. What about this one down here? You said it, Ana. Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. And the last one? Brownsville, Matamoros, right? So the trade, one of the things that I think people have really started to understand is that moving back and forth really makes people nervous sometimes. And so our ports of entry are there to provide a level of security, are there to provide a level of assuredness, but we don't need to be scared or nervous when things move back and forth, right? Okay. Next question. What are the two major rivers that supply water to multiple states and border region? Yes, yes. Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, which is not Grande or Bravo. When my family from Brazil comes down, they tell me that. And then the Colorado Basin, right? So those are the two major sources of water from the region. So the IBWC has three basins, two treaties, and lots of challenges, right? So the first basin right here is the Colorado River, right here. And the Rio Grande is really two basins, okay? You have the northern part, right? And then the lower part. And I'll talk a little bit about why they're different. Okay, so the IBWC is responsible for the deliveries of water to Baja California and Sonora. And for Baja California, the city of Tijuana, have you guys all heard of Tijuana? Right, the television capital, right? Right. They depend 100% on this water source. So they pump it over the mountain, so it's really important. And of course, all of the agriculture down in that area. So this was part of the cool part of my job was I got to get a private tour. Thank you to the Bureau of Reclamation of the Hoover Dam. But many of you have seen this picture of the drought, right? Okay. So in the 1944 Water Treaty, the United States is responsible to deliver 1.5 million acre feet of water per year to Mexico through the Yuma area. So Mexico can say, I don't care if you have drought. It's your problem. Just give me my water. Right? And so why is it that we were able to convince Mexico to take less water? And I'll talk a little bit about that. Is that since minute 306, this is the first time there was an actual discussion of water for the environment. In 2000, to do studies for the water for the environment. In 2010, it was a conceptual framework for cooperative actions. At that point, it was agreed that there was an issue. And then all of these minutes that came after that, minute 318, where they adjusted the delivery schedules because of an earthquake, and they allowed the first time for Mexico to store their water up in Hoover Dam. 319 was a pilot to create conservation and conserve volumes. This is the one that was negotiated under Ambassador Salazar's tenure at the Bureau of at the Department of Interior. Minute 323 in 2017 to extend this program. And then I negotiated minute 330 for further reductions, recognizing that there wasn't enough water for the region. Okay. So this is cooperation that goes back 24 years. And I want to highlight that because I want to highlight that a lot of the issues that you're hearing about Texas is because of the lack of coordination. And so let me show you some of the results that came from that cooperation. Minute 319 that I said was negotiated and signed in 2019. This is where the United States invested 21 million in water conservation and environmental projects. Here's the US-Mexico border. These are all canal linings for water efficiency, laser levelings, more metering. Most of this is in the Baja California. It was the first time they delivered 158,000 acre feet of water for environment. And why is that? Because this corridor right here, this corridor is really important for birding, and for the environment and so Audubon, others, the Walton Foundation, they all donated to this effort. It created 1,100 acres of enhanced riparian, and it was the first model for successful cooperation. This is right here, some of the spaces that these were all desert. In a matter of 3 to 5 years, because of this cooperation, they were able to create these riparian areas. Minute 323, again, an additional funding coming from the United States, 31.5 million in funding. and 229,000 acre feet of water were given to the United States agencies that contributed to this. Again, Mexico cooperating in exchange for efforts to do water conservation in building durable infrastructure that would allow their farmers to be more efficient. The other thing that I did, I negotiated minute 330, and that was for an additional reduction of 400,000 acre feet in exchange for $65 million from the Bureau of Reclamation. Now, what's interesting is that this is when all of the states were getting on the order of $1 billion. So this is a little bit of money that goes a long way with Mexico in order to prepare them for what is aridification of the Colorado River, not just drought. And so what's next? Post 2026. Does anybody know what's going to happen at post 2026? Not the end of the world. Interim guidelines, right? So there are a lot of states, 7 states and Mexico that receive water, all the way up to Wyoming, right? That receive water from the Colorado River. And they all agreed this is how we're going to operate all of these reservoirs. But that agreement ends in 2026. And the levels in the reservoir determine how much of a reduction each of the states are going to receive. So right now, when that ends in 2026, it's going to revert back to the original rules. And those original rules are now recognizing that there may not be enough water. So right now, there's 17.5 million acre feet of water that's divided up amongst the 7 states and Mexico. They're thinking that there's probably closer to 13 million acre feet now. So everybody's going to have to take a cut. And so for the United States, Mexico can say, well, that's your problem. Just give me my water. Right? And this is where cooperation is really important. We share in times of plenty, and we share in times of drought. So how did they do that? Well, has anybody ever seen these? This is science at its best, right? And you can see Bureau of Reclamation. They do modeling of a 2-year outlook. So this was the one that they did in August of 2025, and I'm not the expert, but they have all of these trace lines for the last 30 years. And they start saying, well, this is the high, this is the average, this is the most probable, and this is the minimum that we project out. And so based on what the levels are that they predict out, there's a level here, and I kind of blanked it out, but there's a level here that says this is where we feel that Lake Mead, the levels at Lake Mead are, and this is what everybody's got to do their cut. This is what Arizona does, Nevada, Mexico, and there's different programs that these all go into. But the whole point is that this is reviewed with Mexico every single month. This is what you do to build trust with science, right? And so this is really important because then Mexico starts to see that maybe the snowpack is not resulting the way it needs to result, right? Maybe the runoff is not happening. Maybe the temperature, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that. And the other thing, this is another cool graph that Bureau of Reclamation says, if we hadn't done all of these measures of what's being done in the interim guidelines, these 318, 319, 323, the DCP, the drought contingency plan, this is where we would be, right? As opposed to here. So this is where you start to show how cooperation amongst the states and working together is really important. But that's done because you have a lot of community meetings. You have all of these levels in the United States of governance that will bring sanity to what the craziness is of what's happening to our weather patterns, right? So because of that, we were able, and that other slide, we were able to negotiate something like 6 minutes going back from 2000 to 2025, adjusting, really understanding the Colorado River and how everybody has to take a cut. Mexico is taking about a 20% cut in their deliveries right now. to the California area. And exchange, they've gone over a certain amount of time, $100 million that's being invested in their irrigation canals, creating efficiencies, because there's a lot of inefficiencies in Mexico still in their irrigation canals. So now I'm going to talk about the 1944 Water Treaty, the Rio Grande. 2 treaties, 2 basins. Why is it 2 basins? This one is, there we go. So this piece of the basin, that's the one you're most familiar with, right? Supplies water to Juarez, 60,000 acre feet per year. That's all it says. And there's already, Bureau of Reclamation does great modeling. They show, again, share of science, there's quarterly meetings that's held with Mexico and the Bureau of Reclamation. And they show us how projections are at Elephant Butte. Elephant Butte right now is at 4%. It's not in good shape. And whatever is extracted out of Elephant Butte, a part of it goes to southern New Mexico, part of it goes to El Paso, part of it goes to Mexico, right? But our obligation is 60,000 acre feet. And then this piece of it is what the 1944 Water Treaty is, right? We talked about the 1944 Water Treaty for the Colorado, 1.5 million acre feet per year. Here, Mexico delivers 1.75 million acre feet over 5 years. Anybody can guess why one is every year and the other one is every 5 years? Is there a difference between snowpack and rainwater? Right. So it snows every year, although we're starting to see on the Colorado River that they may be getting, 80, 90% of average snow, but they're not getting the same runoff that they were having before because of increases in temperature, right? But here, it doesn't rain every year. And so Mexico, in this case, you can see from here, 2/3 of this watershed is all in Mexico. And this is where Mexico provides water to the United States. Okay. And so one of the things that's different between this watershed, aside from the fact that the Colorado River supplies 7 states and 40 million people, and this is closer to 6 million people. The difference between this watershed is they only have 2 senators, and the other watershed has 14 senators, right? Politics matter in all of these things, right? And that's why funding is so important, and the role of the federal government is so important, is because they are the ones that are creating these programs that help communities adapt to less water, or what we call aridification, right? Okay, so the 1906, this is what we're responsible for delivering to Juarez, to Mexico in the Juarez area, 60,000 acre feet. Of course, we don't meet it every year, right? And again, but there are agreements in place that allow us to deliver less without violating the treaty. Those minutes, if they had not been in place for the Colorado River and we were not delivering 1.5 million acre feet a year, we would be violating a treaty, right? And so that is one of the things we don't want to be doing as a country, is showing an example that we are not trustworthy and we cannot meet our obligations. Okay. Here, there is a mechanism for reductions as well. Okay. But let's talk about the origin of the Rio Grande delivery. So this was really one of the things that I did a lot in educating the constituents that are related to the lower Rio Grande along Texas, all the way from Presidio all the way down to South Texas, is for them to understand that the deliveries from Mexico are not every year. And why? Because of this. There is this, when the 1944 Water Treaty was signed, Mexico had a lot of gauging station data. You can see here going back to 1900. Okay, and these are all different. They had them for all of their rivers. Okay, and if we come back here, these are the rivers that they have. They have all the way up into the Rio Conchos that comes here. This is the Presidio area. They have a series of other rivers in Coahuila, and then they have another river down here in Tamaulipas, which is not part of the treaty, but actually has more water than any of the other rivers. And on all of these tributaries, they all have a series of reservoirs, and you can see these are all of the reservoirs that they have, okay? So when they negotiated the water treaty, they hadn't built all those reservoirs, but they had done enough modeling to understand that they were going to build more reservoirs, and that if we took the period from 1900 to 1943 and just projected it forward, we would be able to, Mexico would be able to meet their 5-year obligations with a few incidences where they would not. But is it raining the same as it did in 1900? No. We see that here, right? And so what has happened because of that? Mexico, because of this, they deliver water, what's called wild water, whatever they cannot capture with their reservoirs, but they're capturing less. So there's no more spillage that will go into the United States. So Mexico does not manage its basin to include these obligations. They said, well, we had hydrologic data that said we would meet it every year. So these are 5-year periods, each blue, and this is what they would need to be at. And so there were only a few where they didn't, and they would just make it up the next year, or the next 5 years, I'm sorry. Okay. So this is what has been happening in Texas. And this is one of the things that I did a lot to educate not only our constituents, members of Congress, but also having those frank and open discussions with Mexico, is that instead of it turning into what, give me my effing water, right? This is what's happening, okay? So this is the 1992-97 cycle, and Mexico was in arrears this much. This is, and remember that year, 1992? This is the 1997-2002. Mexico was in arrears this much. And in the 2002, 2007, they made it up. So they have to deliver that amount of water. Then we had a hurricane, and this was only 3 years. So everything is good. It's only 3 years. We move on to the next 5-year cycle. And again, they fall in arrears, but they made it up in the next year. Okay. And so right now, the cooperation with them on water started in 2022. 2020, with minute 2025. Cooperation on the Rio Grande went back to 2000. So all of this cooperation. So on the Texas side, cooperation with Mexico has only begun because, frankly, and this is what I say very openly, we were asleep. The United States government was asleep at the wheel. We let this happen to us. Right? And we let it happen to us every single 5 years. But what I wanted to do was change that narrative by talking about, why are you managing your reservoirs by only giving us what you spill? It is not raining the same. So this is the type of information that Mexico had a lot less resources than the United States. And IBWC is a very small agency, but we were really emulating what the Bureau of Reclamation was doing the same type of analysis. So those were the 5 cycles that I just talked about. This is a 5-year cycle right here. And if they were delivering every year the amount that should be the average, we would be here. Those are the 5 years that I showed you. This is where we were. This is the one that's going on right now. This is where we were before I signed this minute 331 that allowed Mexico to give us more water. So again, cooperation got us up here, but it's going to be way behind. So right now, as of August 23rd, they've only delivered 756,000 acre feet, and they're responsible for 1.75 million acre feet. So these are you can have all this beautiful cooperation, but things like this will take over the discussion, right, in our relationship with Mexico. So when you hear President Trump threatening to put in tariffs against Mexico, some of it is related to this, the lack of water deliveries that are coming from Mexico. 2/3 of the water shed are on the Mexican side. And so here are their reservoirs. So you have these watersheds that come into the Rio Grande. Here's Amistad. Here's the other international, Falcon. This is the Rio Grande. As you can see, this is where we have our reservoirs. This is where we have U.S. and Mexican nationals working side by side. And right now, so they're in about 1 million acre feet in arrears. This basin here has 955,000 acre feet. This middle basin has, which includes this one right here, is 165,000 acre feet. And then these lower ones have 1.2 million acre feet. And I'll talk a little bit about these lower ones. But this is what Mexico, all this water here is above the dams. And as you know, dams are really important to manage your infrastructure, to manage your water deliveries, right? So they only have about 1.2 million acre feet, and they owe the United States 1 million acre feet. They're not going to give the United States all of their water, right? Because they have their own recreational areas up here. They have their own agriculture up here. But this is the point, that this whole area down here relies 100% on Rio Grande water. Okay. So this lower tribs here, they have a lot of water, but it's south of the dams. So it's hard to make the delivery from these. Can't be captured. There's no dams. So, and you can't just be delivering water. It's very difficult because down in South Texas, they have a lot of old style of canals that don't have good gate systems. And so that is the challenge. So where Mexico has the water, we cannot take it. And where we want the water, they don't have it. So that's the wicked problem that the region is having, right? So getting back to this one. This region here needs about 2 million acre feet of water per year. And the treaty between the United States and Mexico says 350,000 acre feet of water is what Mexico should deliver on average over 5 years, 1.75 million acre feet. So 1.75 million acre feet, if Mexico was delivering 350,000 acre feet of water, would that be enough for the region that needs 2 million? No, right? So what did I do? I said, what is happening in the US? Because if you go here, take a step back, there are other sources of water that come from the United States side. Okay. So this is where cooperation and science, and there's a saying in Spanish called cuentas claras, amistades largas. Clear accounts means long friendships, right? Transparency of information. So I started to see what was happening on the US side. And we started to see in these tributaries to Lingua, Alamito, Pecos, and Devils, we started to see that they had a 32% drop in deliveries as compared to the 1980s, 1990 decade. Okay, so above Amistad, there was 460,000 acre feet of water lost. And above Falcon, there was another 110,000 acre feet of water loss. And so if you put that together, that's almost what, 500 and almost 600,000 acre feet of water that is no longer available. So the impact to the region was not just that Mexico was having trouble delivering. The impact to the region was that there was also problems in the tributaries on the US side. Was it more farming? Was it changes in temperature? Was it less precipitation? We don't know. We don't know. But why did I do that? And I had to speak truth to power on this one. This caught a lot of people off guard. And it's very difficult when you come out with terrible news that people don't want to hear. But what's important for them is that what I told them is this is information that you need so that you can advocate you can have your senators and members of Congress advocate for themselves, right? So that they can ask for money. How did the Inflation Reduction Act allocate $2 billion just for the Colorado? $2 billion. Because of all of the advocacy, because of all of the pictures, because of all of the science, because everything they showed was that there was less water in the river. The Rio Grande is having the same issues all through. And you guys are seeing it up here, right? So issues of hydrology. Remember I said 1992? This is the Mexican tributaries. In 1992, this is where we had the greatest change of average. And on the US tributaries, 1992. They didn't get together and it happened, right? So these are the things that these are the important discussions. So you can see the average here is the drop right here. This one I didn't do the line right, but yeah, there was an inflection point in 1992 in the average of water flowing in from these tributaries into the Rio Grande and was affecting everyone along the tributary, but that information had not been provided. So I did that for about 2 years, um, educating the public, helping them understand, building that trust again, so that they could understand. And they did get money from USDA for efficiencies. They got money from Bureau of Reclamation for efficiencies. So it did have its power, but it needs to continue. And that whole basin needs to be studied. The hydrology needs to be studied because we don't know why there's less water. I suspect it's the rate very similar to what's happening in the Colorado River. You have a higher temperature, you have snow, you have a longer period of hot, which means you have more vegetation growing, which you have more water being sucked up, more evapotranspiration. You have less precipitation, you have warmer soils. I mean, all of that, if it's happening on the Colorado River, it's happening down in this area, in the Pecos and the Devils region as well. So what are the future challenges that I see coming forward? And I'm writing a couple of papers with some very important people on what I see. This is the Big Bend area. It does not have water right now. It's dry. And I think that getting back to this, I'm going to show you this book. There's this book that's published. It's called The River Basin Organizations and Water Diplomacy. So this is just so you can see it. I wrote a chapter on this book and I talked about the Rio Grande. This was before I was the IBWC commissioner, but this group of people, they wrote about all kinds of transboundary water management. They're the ones that maintain, and they're they're in the Deft Institute up in I don't remember what European country, I think Geneva. But what they do, no, in the Netherlands, they're in the Netherlands. What they do is that they track all of the transboundary watersheds and where the cooperation is, because one of the things is that there has not been a point where people are warring over water. But if we are not continuing to build that cooperation, that science, there could be war over water. And there are areas, especially in some of the Middle Eastern countries, where they've become so dry that people have left those areas. And that's where you start getting terrorist activities related to abandoned areas of a country because there's no population there because of lack of water. So one of the things that they talk about is that it's really important for successful collaboration is to have all of this, a common vision. What is a common vision? And one of the things that I think the region is going to really need to grapple with, are we talking drought, which is, our highs and lows, or are we talking aridification where it's just a permanent less amount of water, right? Equity versus equality. Right? Is every segment of society going to be impacted the same? Those are important commonalities and a common vision that the two countries have to come to. Hydrodiplomacy. Right now, all of the reductions that have been happening on the Colorado River and on the upper part of the Rio Grande have been voluntary. Are we going to still be moving with voluntary reductions versus mandate? And that's what's happening right now because of the interim guidelines on the Colorado River that are going to be expiring, right? The 7 states haven't come to an agreement as to how that watershed should be managed. The upper basin states feel that the lower basin states should take a higher proportion of the cuts. But I'm sure, everybody has their reasons. Basis for decision-making. A tax on science and unstable funding is not helpful. Science and funding is really important. And so what's the role of the federal government? I mean, this is the economic theory, right? To come in and fill the gaps where the markets cannot take care of themselves, right? And water is not, you can't go out and get loans. There's not necessarily a revenue source for it. So this is the role that the federal government is important to play, is filling the gaps where the markets cannot fill. And then, so the funding is important. A tax on science do not help. And then the environment. Water delivery. So one of the things in the case of South Texas, the Rio Grande is just seen as a pipe to deliver water. But really, is it water delivery versus ecosystem? You know, the ecosystem is very important. There's a lot of work that's being done in restoration sites in this area. The Colorado River is very progressive on that. The upper part of the Rio Grande is very progressive on that, but not the rest of the Rio Grande. And then what's the role of civil society, right? The governance. And so I highlight the role of the civil society because in Mexico, I used to think it was really easy, really easy to manage water because the federal government owns all the water. All of it. They own all of the minerals so if you have a farm and you have water under your farm, doesn't matter, it belongs to the federal government. And in the United States, you have so many agencies, so many levels of opinions and involvement and responsibilities. But you know what that does? People call it bureaucracy, but it's good governance. And that's what one of the things that my personal opinion, Maria Elena Giner, is missing on the Mexican side is that there's not a good socialization there's not good science and there's not good socialization of the issues. And so in 2020, actually that's happened multiple times already. Even though the federal government in Mexico owns the reservoirs, you have farmers taking over them and not allowing for the gates to be open. And so they have to deploy the military and all of that. So those are social unrest issues that I think are going to be really important future challenges. So my final trivia question. All right. So these are all of the agencies that I used to had the privilege of working. Some of the Mexican agencies. SRE is the equivalent of Department of State in the United States. Semarnat under that. This is Semarnat. That's the environmental agency, and CONAGUA is the federal agency that manages water. All right. So can anybody tell me who this is? Yes. Department of Interior. And then, of course, we worked a lot with the Bureau of Reclamation and the USGS. Can anybody tell me what this is? Who? Who said the State Department? You guys, can you give those two ladies back their candies because they've been answering and I haven't been able to throw that far. Yes. Okay, yes. Can anybody tell me who this is? Yes, EPA, right? How about this one? Who said that? Okay, you get a candy, my friend. And can anybody tell me who this last one is? Homeland Security, that's right. So these are all of the people that we work with as a federal agency. And so we're well recognized amongst all of these, but we are a small agency. And so this is the what I tell people that, especially as I do speak to a lot of students, what worked for me, right, with the public? Because one of the things that I always share is my greatest challenge was people, right? And going into rooms of angry surfers or angry farmers or both of them together is rough. But this is kind of the rules that I never sent anybody else in to meet with the public. It was always me. Because half my job was showing up, half my job, was I felt that's that permanent Catholic guilt, right? Of being efficient with taxpayer dollars is every time I went into these meetings, I was prepared. I sat down with staff and I said, okay, tell me what would be some of the issues. Tell me, let's go through this. Let's go through the numbers. Let's go through the science. And that's when you go there are a lot of angry people. And when you tell them that this is what's happening, when you go in with confidence on knowing the issues, it goes a very, very long way. Transparency and public engagement. I had public meetings almost every month that I was going to. So I know Nathan, right? Nathan? Nate. Nate and I were talking about, all the public meetings that were being held, and as well as you, sir, right? We were also talking about the public meetings. That is the opportunity. That is good governance. That is good governance. And transparency with the information, sometimes communicating bad news, letting them know that we don't just have a problem in Mexico, we have a problem in the United States. And that's very difficult. And this is last. I always go by this last. You listen, you don't take responsibility because sometimes it's not your responsibility, but you acknowledge that there's an issue and you think about it from a perspective of empathy. You share your solutions and you always thank the public for sharing their knowledge because it takes courage to do that, right? And trust, building that trust in those coalitions. So when I started at the IBWC, the budget for the agency to manage all of that infrastructure, the construction budget was $32 million. And the operations budget was less than $50 million. By the time I left, because of the trust, being prepared, showing results, I had it up to 400 million. And so again, you do that because you build coalitions, right? But what worked for me as a leader? So one of the things is that it's a fine balance between going into detail and micromanaging, right? And so one of the things that I always shared with staff is that I'm a very curious person and I needed to know sufficient detail because it's just a lady thing. It's just a woman thing. I need to put the puzzle together in my head. A lot of evidence-based decision-making, and some of that was quantitative, but some of it was qualitative. Going to those public meetings, right? Solving the problem collaboratively. It's strategic and adaptive. And any of you guys recognize any of these people? Yeah. Texas, more Republican you can't get. California, Arizona. Water can be political, but it's not partisan. And that's always something to remember. Right. And so there were not 350 Maria Elenas running around the IBWC. Right. And so these are just some of my career highlights. I signed 6 minutes. I did a lot of institutional accountability and via operational enhancements. And what I did, the way I did it was I communicated a clear vision. And the only reason I did that was because I was getting all mixed up in my head when I first started. And so I dropped things into buckets, people, projects, and policies. And that's how I communicate. I put these up in all of the field visits. Whenever I visited every field office a minimum of 1 time per year. And one of the things I would always make sure people understood is the value that they had for the IBWC and the role that they played. So I would ask a heavy equipment operator, what do you do down in South Texas that's responsible for maintaining the levees? And they would always say, I mow, I drive heavy equipment. I said, no, you don't. You protect the lives of 5 million people with flood protection. And understanding that changes the narrative. Understanding that gave me the results that I was looking for. We went from performance metrics of 59% to 93% and increased our budget from 100 to 400 million because we were able to achieve results. So my advice to those that are, how many students do we have in the audience? Can you raise your hand? Okay, oh, quite a few, okay. So while you're in school, take advantage of all the internship opportunities. Build your network before you need them. Never burn those bridges. There are people that I worked for that, God, were tough on me, but then later they worked for me. Learn to write, present, and speak in public. And the one thing is embrace the uncomfortable. Always when you're feeling uncomfortable, you go in there and you just visualize yourself getting through it, right? And then throughout your career, learn how your boss prefers to communicate. You adapt to them. Don't expect them to adapt to you. Be accountable by showing results. And this is the one rule I told my staff that I wanted them to follow, okay? Because there's a lot of variability in the world that you don't know, that you cannot control. But when you're surprised and when I'm surprised, keep it short, right? And then your first job will not be your dream job. And ultimately, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So always think of that. So being a public servant was the hardest job I ever had, but the most rewarding. And I don't know if anybody knows who Barbara Jordan is. Yes. Oh my God, sir, you get your candy. You get the last one. I think she should have. She was the first African American. Here you go. My last one. So I get to go home with none, which is perfect. She was the first African American in Texas to be a member of Congress. And she had this quote: "If the society today allows wrongs to go unchallenged, the impression is created that those wrongs have the approval of the majority." So speaking up takes courage. So do not ever stop speaking up. It is only good governance. Thank you very much. I'm fine. Oh, I passed my time. I passed it.
We're a little over time, but I think we can maybe take a question or two, and then, of course, we have our reception. We encourage you all to go. There's dinner provided, so please. Yes. I just have a comment. Congratulations for being an engineer, son of a lawyer with your talent.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's one of the things I'm always told that I should have been that I'm very lawyer-like in my thinking. And I just think I just come from a position of empathy. You just need to come from a position of empathy. So I was asked to resign. And so I resigned. And so right now, it is a very unique time during this political time. But I think that geography will never change between the two countries. And there's too many ties, trade ties, there's too many important relationships between the two countries. And I really honestly feel that they will prevail. This is testing it. It's testing the governance that's put in place right now, and it's testing the relationship between two countries where we have brothers and sisters living across the border from each other, right? Sharing water, sharing environment, sharing commerce, sharing all of the things that create jobs on both sides of the border. And time is going to tell. So I'm fairly optimistic. Right, right, right. Rod, thank you. Thank you very much. And maybe you'll see me back one day. Thank you.
So we want to just provide Dr. Giner with some tokens of our appreciation for
Thank you.
being here from
Thank you very
Adams
much.
State.
Oh, a t-shirt. I love it.
Yeah, so very quickly, this is our exclusive Grandes Historias Comienzan Aquí t-shirt.
Ooh.
So our motto, our theme here is great stories begin here, and we are fortunate to translate it. And so you're but one of
Wow.
5 people to have it because we just got them hot off the press. So
Very
thank you so much for the work you do.
Cool. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And again, please join us at Vistas for dinner and we can continue the conversation. So thank you again for being here this evening.